Hello, Tigrai Press family, and thank you for joining our live broadcast. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Hiyab Teshome as we explore the topics envisioning a free and independent Tigray in the Horn of Africa. We invite you to stay with us until the end of the program. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support our experience. Welcome here to our live broadcast, and this is your first time joining us here at Tigrai Press. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us who you are and what you are currently working on. Then we will dive right into today's discussion.
Hi, my name is Hiyab Teshome. I am a student at Michigan, a medical student, MD, PhD.
Wow.
I also am an organizer here in Michigan with our graduate union and our pro-Palestine movement. And I also organize for Tigray through Omna Tigray and the Voices of an Independent Tigray. Both of my parents are Tigrayan. I'm very proud Tigrayan American, and I'm really glad to be here today talking to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Hiyab. What motivates you to support for an independent Tigray?
Yeah, so as many of us know, Tigray has undergone a very horrific genocide for almost 5 years since November 2020. And we know that this is not the first time in which the people of Tigray have faced oppression by the Ethiopian Empire due to their anti-authoritarian views and due to the strength of the Tigrayan people to resist authoritarian movements and dictators. The people of Tigray deserve to have their right for freedom, deserve to have the right to live and to exist as a people. And what that means and what that leads to is for Tigray to be independent. What has happened to Tigray under the hands of Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia is nothing short of a catastrophe, and it is very clear that Ethiopia does not recognize the people of Tigray as human beings at all. And so the only solution now is to resist Ethiopia and to get our independence in order to survive, because the people of Tigray do not deserve to be under a genocidal regime. And it is our job as those who are Tigrayans, as those who are here in the diaspora, to resist also with the people of Tigray and to follow the resistance movement and the independence movement and to support the wills of the people of Tigray.
What does independence mean to you politically, economically, and culturally?
Yeah, so independence, what it means to me, mostly what it means is whatever the vision is of the people of Tigray, and however that manifests. And we here are here to support whatever that vision looks like. To me, politically, it means that we no longer recognize the Ethiopian government as our own government, and we no longer answer to the dictator Abiy Ahmed or the Prosperity Party, and that we form our own governments, our own politics, and our own democracy rooted in the principles that the people of Tigray create, and hold our own systems of democracy. Economically, to me, it means that we are able to support ourselves and support our people, and also are able to rebuild what has been destroyed in this genocide, which is everything. There's no more medical systems, there's no more agriculture and economical systems, there's no more education. So thinking through questions like how do we economically support ourselves, how do we rebuild ourselves, and how do we get our land back that belongs to us. And culturally, it means being able to speak our own language, be able to learn our history that is our own history. As we know, in areas like in Western Tigray and Southern Tigray, which are being occupied by the Amhara forces, you can no longer speak Tigrinya. You can no longer write in Tigrinya. The houses are gone. There's no longer anything that is resemblance of Tigray, which is active ethnic cleansing. So how do we undo those processes? How do we keep our language? How do we keep our culture, keep our religion, such that we as Tigrayans are ourselves and our own people? Those are the main roots, I think, when I think of what independence looks like for Tigray.
And what historical or recent events do you believe justify Tigray's separation from Ethiopia?
Yeah, so I think this current genocide has been a massive wake-up call to the community. 5 years of an active genocide in which it's one of the worst catastrophes to have existed in the 20th century. Almost 1 million people have been killed. That is probably an underestimate for a population that is only around 7 million. This is an active extermination attempt by Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Amhara forces to completely eliminate a people. That in of itself justifies Tigray's independence because we no longer are safe within the country of Ethiopia. We also know that there has been over 120,000 men, women, and boys who have experienced sexual and gender-based violence as a tool for genocide, as a tool to stop and ethnically cleanse Tigrayans. There's millions of Tigrayans are internally displaced. Millions are starving at the hands of weaponized starvation, purposely being used by these forces to eliminate a people and to cause long-term effects on the population. And so what we are seeing here is that it's not just, an attack. This is an active extermination of the people of Tigray by Ethiopia. And as such, there is not a future in which Tigray is safe being with Ethiopia or being under the control of Abiy Ahmed. It is their attempt to completely annihilate a whole people, which has been stated multiple times by Abiy Ahmed, as well as those who are in his supporters, and those who are in power with him. And we already saw that before the genocide, Abiy Ahmed was already taking steps to weaken Tigray. He was already cutting road access. He was already weakening Tigray's role in government and weakening TPLF's legitimate role in the Ethiopian government. He was already taking steps to weaken Tigray before the genocide had even started. And even long before this current genocide, we already saw that since the existence of the Ethiopian Empire has tried to annihilate anyone who has ever resisted domination and severely punish and exterminate those people. And most recently, not just with this current genocide, we saw in the first Wayane with Haile Selassie and the second Wayane with the Derg regime. And this is the third in most recent history, an attempt to actively destroy Tigray. But before these most recent histories, this has been happening long before, since the existence of Ethiopia. Anyone who resists this empire is annihilated. And so we have a very strong case for Tigray in order for Tigray to maintain independence, because there is not a future in which Tigray can survive under Ethiopia. And we have to acknowledge that there is no future in which Tigray can be successful with Ethiopia.
And how do you envision an independent Tigray functioning in the Horn of Africa region?
Yeah. So to me, I think that these are important questions in which we would have to think about with the people who are actually living in the Horn of Africa. And so part of, I think, what Tigray's viability depends on is engaging in resistant movements with our neighbors who are also experiencing terrible conditions in their countries. Sudan is currently experiencing another genocide. Eritrea is under the dictator Isaias Afwerki. So we're seeing that there are countries that are surrounding us who are also experiencing horrible conditions and are also in need of resistance movements that are centered with the people. And so we need a people's movement that centers solidarity amongst all of us, all of the people in the Horn of Africa who are facing authoritarianism and neocolonialism. And so what that requires is that there must be recognition in the Horn of Africa that we are all Africans who are being taken advantage of by those who are in power, as well as being taken advantage of by the West and by colonialists. And what is most important is aligning amongst one another as those in the Horn of Africa and those who are African in order to promote stability and also to promote successful development of ourselves and our country.
Do you believe the current Ethiopian constitution allows for a legal path to independence or Article 39?
Definitely. Article 39, I believe it states that there is explicitly, it recognizes that there is an unconditional right for self-determination, including a right to secession. And this is for every nation, every nationality. And I believe it also says for the people in Ethiopia. So it is already stated within the Constitution that there is a right to self-determination. And so this right is further reinforced by what we have seen in not only the history of Ethiopia, but more specifically, or this history of Ethiopia and Tigray, but more specifically in the past 5 years, the systemic violation of Tigrayans' constitutional rights, which are breaches of the constitution, and which allows for Ethiopia, and which allows for Tigray to seek for independence from Ethiopia. So yes, I believe that we do have a legal pathwork within our constitution.
And what steps should be taken to begin a legitimate independence process?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important step is demonstration from the people of Tigray that they seek independence from Ethiopia. And so what would that look like? That would require a lot of political dialogue amongst the people of Tigray, a lot of open forums for discussion. And at the end, it would require a referendum to demonstrate that a majority vote for independence, which is codified in the Ethiopian constitution. And so for me, I think that these are the most important questions that we need to think about, is what does it look like to have an inclusive political consensus and dialogue amongst those in Tigray to ensure democracy, right? Because to engage in an independence process will determine what the future of Tigray looks like. And so we need to engage in an independence process that is very rooted in our principles of democracy and rooted in the principles of the people, in order to ensure that there is successful democracy after we have reached like an agreement for independence. And then we can answer questions such as, what does it look like for a transfer of power between the federal government and Tigray? What does it look like to divide assets? Which are secondary questions that can only be successfully answered if we can ourselves determine that the people of Tigray want an independent Tigray.
How would you address the international recognition and diplomacy for an independent Tigray?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question, and a question that like would have to be like really discussed amongst the people. But to me, our independence, the independence of Tigray, is not tied to recognition by the West, which includes countries who have actively taken part in the genocide of our people. The United States, the UN, the AU have all played active roles in this genocide. And so we cannot depend for Tigray to be independent on actors who actually are benefiting from the fact that Tigray is being kept under siege by Ethiopia. Our independence only comes through ourselves, and it only comes through the will of the people. And it is for the international community to accept and recognize Tigray as an independent country. We already know that we have a very strong case for independence that can be presented to these foreign bodies to make a very clear case for why Tigray cannot exist under the Ethiopian regime. However, we need to be strong. We need to make sure that, and we must acknowledge that these bodies have no interest in promoting diplomacy in Tigray, and in fact have been promoters of genocide and land theft. And as such, we cannot depend on the international community to lead to an independent Tigray, but we must assert that we deserve our independence and that we are able to present that case to these independent bodies.
And what economic plan does the movement propose for an independent Tigray?
Yeah, I think I am definitely no expert in economics, but I think that immediately what we need to think about is what we have lost in this genocide, right? Tigray is composed mostly of subsistence farmers, and we have seen that Eritrean, Ethiopian, and Amhara forces have completely destroyed the agricultural frameworks that have been put in place in Tigray. We've seen that the hospitals have been destroyed. We see that textile manufacturing. We see that all of these very core infrastructures for the development of Tigray have been completely destroyed purposely by the Ethiopian government and Eritrean forces, because they wanted to weaken Tigray. So some of the questions that we would have to answer is, what does it look like to rebuild core infrastructure? And especially, what does it look like to rebuild social services that have been lost, that were helping the people before this genocide started? In the long term, I think some of the things that we need to think about are, what resources does Tigray have that can be used in order for us to succeed when we get independence? We already know that Tigray is heavily dependent on agriculture. What does it look like to rebuild? What does it look like to implement land and property reforms in order to develop again that centers around economic development for the people themselves, not just for the country? How can we make sure that the people themselves can feed themselves, can survive? What does it mean to put in place social and institutional investments in order to rebuild? What resources do we have, such as gold or coffee or agriculture, that we can use and take ownership in order to, use in order to build trade and to build like economic infrastructures that are necessary for us to survive?
And how would Tigray sustain itself in terms of food, energy, trade, and infrastructure, do you think?
Yeah. So I think like these are very important things that, all were very purposely destroyed, right, by Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Amhara forces because they wanted to destroy the long-term vision of Tigray. So it is really has to be centered to a formation of an independent Tigray. How do we rebuild these things? How do we rebuild food, energy, trade, and infrastructure? I think first and foremost, food insecurity and agriculture is very important. Like, as we know, millions of Tigrayans are currently starving and are experiencing weaponized starvation due to either being forced into these IDP camps or their land being seized and controlled and the destruction of agriculture. So what does it look like to empower communities, to promote farmers' abilities to strengthen food sovereignty? How can we establish small-scale facilities in order to move beyond subsistence farming, which is what we were before, to improve farmer incomes and to reduce post-harvest loss? How do we scale up modernizing agriculture in Tigray, which we were already doing before the genocide, through different projects that were being formed by the Relief Society of Tigray? How can we empower farmers in order to feed themselves should be a big question in this new formation of an independent Tigray. In terms of energy, how do we repair and upgrade the existing small hydropower schemes that were in existence before this genocide? How do we rebuild those kinds of infrastructures? Especially, like, how do we take advantage of the rivers that exist in Tigray, such as the Tigray River, to restore clean and reliable energy in Tigray? How can we utilize things like solar mini grids and household solar kits in remote areas to reduce dependence on generators, especially since we are seeing that it is impossible to get fuel in Tigray and that there's increasing costs for fuel in Tigray? How do we rebuild transmission and distribution lines that have been damaged in the genocide? In terms of trade, we also need to be able to have conversations with our neighbors in Sudan and in Somalia and potentially Eritrea to see how can we access these ports, how can we be in agreement with one another to support each other in terms of trade, in order to be able to economically develop our nations. I believe that before the genocide, Tigray had maybe 11 entry trade routes. What does it look like to restore these trade routes such that we can significantly lower import costs? What does it look like to promote regional manufacturing and trading? Should be some questions that we're thinking about. And in terms of infrastructure, we see that infrastructure has been completely destroyed in Tigray. What does it look like to rebuild major roads and bridges which have been purposely destroyed to promote trade? How does it look like to restore water and sanitation and healthcare? Because if we can't give people proper food and proper water and proper healthcare, then we are just promoting more death through the people of Tigray. And also, what does it look like to restore telecommunication, which has been blockaded in Tigray, and it's one of the longest telecommunication blockades to exist. I think figuring out how can we rebuild, but also not only during the rebuilding process, how do we become better? How do we upgrade? Are things that we should be thinking about when we talk about what does it look like to sustain Tigray.
Great. And what governance model do you propose? Parliamentary, presidential, federal, etc.?
Yeah, I think to me, the particular brand of governance isn't important. I think that the more important question at hand is how in Tigray are we going to ensure democracy and make sure that the people of Tigray are fully represented in whatever governance model that exists. Questions like how are we going to stop internal divisions and ensure transition that are centered in stability, I think are much more important questions to figure out than whether or not the governance system should be one in which there is a prime minister or president. I think that like the central question is like, how do we promote democracy in Tigray should be the first question before what kind of system we have, whether that be parliamentary, presidential, or federal. Well, I think the question isn't whether or not we should have a prime minister or president. Like, I think that the question should be, what does democracy look like for us? Like, what are the things in which we want to see in this new independent Tigray that we should figure out first? I don't think that it matters if there is like at the end of the day, whether it is a prime minister or president. We are seeing right now that like Prime Minister Netanyahu is the same as President Trump, correct? Like, and it's different kinds of systems, governance models that exist, right? So it's not necessarily the system in of itself. What matters is what are the principles at hand that we are going to follow in this new democracy. And then from there, we can think of things more, such as, is it better to have this parliamentary system? Is it better to have a presidential system? Is it better to have a federal system? I think is what I mean. Not necessarily, we should have
how will you ensure transparency, democracy, and anti-corruption measures in the new states of Tigray?
Yeah, I think that the democratic institutions and the processes that are going to be implemented in Tigray should be focused on promoting diverse voices that exist in Tigray and being able to have dialogue and conversation with those who are in diverse opinions and diverse voices, and being able to not criminalize having these kinds of discussions. I think that is going to be very, very important, holding these public forums, holding these public discussions as a way to build not only trust, but democracy. We also see that in terms of things like crime and corruption in this new state that we hopefully will not see, part of the ability to be able to have have corruption and crime is through destroying things like news and press, whose job is to expose the truth, right? And so we are seeing that, like Abiy Ahmed purposely has killed journalists, has purposely put this telecommunication blockade, because this is a way in order to hide the truth. This is a way to hide the awful things that are happening. And so having legal safeguards for press, promoting the ability for people to be able to use their free speech is really, really important, and has to occur and has to be very central to this new state that will exist. Also, we have to have explicit anti-corruption clauses, and as well as independent oversight bodies to ensure that the people of Tigray are not being taken advantage of, as well as promoting open data legislations that require that anything, including contracts, budgets, or agreements, that they are all filed and published, as well as accessible to all people of Tigray. These should be, I think, in my opinion, some of the central things that we think about when we are talking about things like transparency, things like anti-corruption.
Plan for the national security and defense in an independent Tigray?
Yeah, I think that I don't particularly have a good answer for this question. I think it is a really difficult question to think about. I think right now what we do know is that we have a resistance force, and what we need to do right now is how can we support our resistance force to allow us to support the people who are currently under genocidal attack is like the first question. How can we make sure that this genocide ends and this active campaign for killing? And how do we support the resistance force in order for this to happen? In terms of national security and defense, that would require conversations with our surrounding neighbors. So for example, we have to engage, right? If we're going to try to have an independent Tigray, we have to engage in conversations with Ethiopia. We have to engage in conversations with Eritrea, who right now are the genocidal forces. So what do these conversations look like that doesn't lead to things like the cessation of hostilities agreement, which is a fake peace agreement, which has continued a genocide to occur since its signing? So how do we make sure that we do not end up in these kinds of peace agreements again? What does it look like to implement peace? And part of that requires that Ethiopian forces, Eritrean forces, and Amhara forces are out of Tigray. Part of why there is still a genocide occurring is because that condition, which is a very important condition that was set in the cessation of hostilities, has not been fulfilled. As long as these forces are within Tigray, Tigray is not safe. So I think that should be also a really big priority in promoting national security in Tigray.
Great. The next question is how will you deal with internal divisions or oppositions to independence within Tigray itself?
Yeah, I think that as like we move forward and we begin to talk about this question, right? This is a very difficult question to answer
As well, yeah.
right? Like, what does it look like to have a free Tigray, and what does this mean? And it's a question that we see is asked a lot, right? And so that is a question that, you know, we can't just answer. It's a question that requires conversation and it requires dialogue amongst those who are living in Tigray. And so it is okay for there to be internal division. It is okay to be opposition. What's not okay is suppression. What's not okay is not allowing people to voice those opinions. And how that occurs is through having these public forums, having discussions that occur amongst the people in which we talk through these very difficult questions, like what does it actually look like for there to be independence? How are we going to sustain ourselves? A lot of the questions that you asked me here today, they need to be answered because that is the only way that there will be confidence in what it looks like to have an independent state. And so, yeah, there will be definitely division and opposition. You know, that it is natural in terms of people having different opinions and people trying to do what is best for their country. But the only way that we can get past that is through discussion, through transparency, and through making sure that the people are united together to move forward. And that would require conversations to occur and not being afraid of having those very difficult conversations.
That is awesome. Do you mind if we take like 1 or 2 minutes break?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Cool. Tigrai Press family, we'll be right back. At the meantime, please share, like, and subscribe this program. We'll be right back.
كنكي زي كونس نخوسخ يوزنبر زتقر عقمو زقبر كنت حماق زقت مني كل يكون زقوت عني الدلياي تتلمني عطاو بياها جوز حميلا من حابر موياها مبار كلاماني حواتين كنوا شو عتقزي ودكاس شو منطق زي قندس سطح رباخ توصل كل كنكي زي كونس نخوسخ يوزنبر زتقر عقمو زقبر كنت حماق زقت مني كل يكون زقوت عني الدلياي تتلمني عطاو بياها جوز حميلا من حابر موياها مبار كلاماني حوار.
We are back. Let me do the next question. How will you work to avoid future armed conflict with Ethiopia or neighboring regions?
Yeah, definitely. I think that what we do have right now, right, is an example where it's not working with this cessation of hostilities, right? We are seeing that even though there's a cessation of hostilities or this peace agreement, we are still seeing that we are in active conflict with Ethiopia, with Eritrea and Amhara forces. And so what we have to do is engage in open dialogue with these forces in order to figure out what does it mean to make sure that there is no longer armed conflict. And part of that requires also for, like I said before, for these foreign forces to leave Tigray. You cannot expect for the people of Tigray to engage in conversation about a future armed conflict when those who are actively causing the genocide are still in the region itself. So I think that is the first step, one, in order to ensure safety for the people of Tigray, but also to be able to even begin to have a conversation with the forces who have committed genocide about what does a future look like. I also think that in order to avoid future armed conflict, it requires active acknowledgement of what has been done, active recognition by Ethiopia, by Eritrea, and by Amhara forces that they have committed a genocide. There is no path in which there can be avoiding a future of conflict without recognition and without reparations for what they have done to Tigray themselves. And so I think that that is a really important point, and we cannot expect to avoid future conflicts until we acknowledge what has happened and until our first step is to remove the invading forces from Tigray. Then we can engage in diplomacy talks. We can engage in talks about what does land separation look like? What does it look like for asset holding? What does all of these other things can only happen when we eliminate, when we remove the forces causing genocide first.
Yeah. And I will have a few questions about social and cultural identity. How important is language, religion, and culture in your vision of independence?
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think a people is only by their culture, by their society, right? Tigrayans have a unique culture. We have a unique language. And so that is central to it. And we have seen that this genocide is not just a genocide that has resulted in like the death of millions of people, the weaponization of starvation, right? It is also a cultural genocide. And part of this, part of always putting in place cultural genocide is so as you can not only eliminate a people, but also eliminate their history and traditions. And we see that happening in Tigray. We saw that there was the bombing of the Al-Nagash mosque. We saw that the occupation of the Martyrs Museum, which is so important to the culture and history of Tigray. And so what we have to do, or what we have to acknowledge, is that this has been used as a weapon of this genocide. And so how can we make sure that we restore our history, restore the things that have been destroyed? How do we make sure that our language is being used in Tigray? Because we are seeing that in Western Tigray, right? Tigrinya is not being allowed. And part of that is so as to ethnically cleanse and to destroy the culture. So how can we ensure that our language is allowed to be freely used in the region? How do we allow for our religious monuments, which have been destroyed? How can we rebuild them again? Because it is things like culture that allows for people to have strength and allow for the people to continue on in these horrific conditions. And so these things are very, very crucial and are part of independence, being able to maintain our language, our religion, and our culture.
Amazing. We're about to finish our questions here. We still have a few left. What role should Tigray's diaspora play within the independence movement and future state building?
Yeah, I think that the role of the diaspora is not to come in to Tigray, right, and to dictate and to say what should be happening in Tigray, because we are here. We are not in the conditions that are existing there. But what we can do and what our job is to support the people, to support the resistance, and to do what we can to ensure that to safeguard the rights of Tigrayans should be the central mission of those who are in the diaspora. This is our duty. And I think even more so than, in addition to supporting the people who are there and being able to support whatever that vision looks like for an independent Tigray, I think our duty here and what we should do with our privilege of being able to be in the West, or our privilege of not being in Tigray, not being actively genocided there, is our duty is to show the world what is happening. We already know that people do not know what is happening in Tigray. People do not know that there is a genocide occurring. People do not know that 1 million people have been slaughtered by the Ethiopian regime. And I think that our duty is to make sure that those voices of those voices who are not being heard, that people know that this is what is happening. And because of if people know what is happening, that is how we gain popular support for this movement. If people who have humanity are able to recognize that what is going on is not okay and are able to resist with us and are able to support us in our efforts, those are things that we can do in order to help the people of Tigray, is being able to expose what is going on and being able from here, from our place of privilege, being able to get resources there and being able to help expose the crimes that have occurred in order to further create a case for why independence is necessary for Tigray.
I also have a regional and global relations questions. So how do you plan to establish relationships with neighboring countries like Eritrea, Sudan, and Djibouti?
Yeah, I think that these are like things that will not be like a quick fix. It's going to be like a very, very long discussion, especially since Eritrea has taken part in this genocide, right? Isaias Afwerki made a genocidal alliance with Abiy Ahmed to commit this genocide. And so an independent Tigray would have to pursue a track of diplomacy in order to deepen relationships with our immediate neighbors, because we know that we will not be able to survive in isolation. And so I think that part of it requires that we take on a pan-African mindset in order to support our fellow Africans, or to support each other as fellow Africans. And so what would that look like? With Eritrea, first and foremost, Eritrea needs to remove all of their troops from Tigray. These forces have committed atrocities, and the first step to engaging in any kind of meaningful relationship with Eritrea means that there has to be acknowledgement and justice held for the crimes that have been committed. I don't think we can even think about rebuilding relationships with Eritrea until they are no longer occupying Tigray. Part of this is also being able to establish non-aggression and border demarcations in order to clearly mark the borders, as well as to establish non-aggression treaties with Eritrea. And in addition, that we must enter these joint economic commissions and rehabilitate cross-border roads in order to reopen trade corridors, in order to promote economic development between Eritrea and Tigray. In terms of Sudan, we know that many of our fellow Tigrayan refugees are in Sudan, where they are currently experiencing another genocide that is horrific. And part of what it looks like to rebuild relationships with Sudan, and part of our relationship building with Sudan, is being able to guarantee safe repatriation and local integration of Tigrayan refugees who are in Sudan, and being able to help the refugees who are in Sudan, and also being able to make agreements, including trade and transit agreements across to access the ports that are existing in Sudan, in order to promote economic development for the people both in Tigray and in Sudan. And same thing with Djibouti, negotiating what does it look like to have free trade agreements, negotiating what it looks like to have access to ports, things that are needed in order to have fair and equal relationships with these neighboring countries. And overall, what this will require is creating forums, so as that we can activate conversations amongst the countries and form cross-border infrastructures and projects that are focused on economic development and independence from the West, as well as development that is rooted in solidarity and rooted in rebuilding our own nation for the sake of the people.
Wow. Great. How should an independent Tigray engage with the African Union, United Nations, and other global institutions?
I think that the first step for being able to engage with these bodies is, like I said before, the African Union, the UN, and these global institutions are witnesses to the genocide in Tigray and have done nothing in order to help the people of Tigray, and have actually betrayed the people of Tigray by not doing anything. The African Union is based in Ethiopia and has done nothing but harm the people. And so I think that in engaging with these genocidal bodies, part of it has to be acknowledgement from these bodies about what they have done and what they have allowed to happen in Tigray, and also being able to acknowledge that, you know, our independence is not based on these bodies. These are just bodies who actually benefit from this genocide in Tigray, and being able to have agreements with them that we are going to do what we need to do for our sake of our own people is very, very important. We know that these institutions have absolutely no interest in anything but their own, and have been willing to let millions suffer in Tigray for their own gains. And so Tigray's independence is not grounded in these recognitions by these foreign bodies. An independent Tigray will engage with these entities as any other country would, and be given a seat at the table, because we already know that Tigray has a strong case for independence that will be presented to these institutions. But if self-determination is something that is important for a free Tigray, that means that a self-determination is not dependent on Tigray being independent by the African Union, by the UN, or global institutions. Self-determination is determination that is determined by the people of Tigray, is what I think when you asked me this question.
Yes. Thank you, Yab. You're doing great. Inclusiveness and justice. Let me ask you a couple questions on inclusiveness and justice. How will you ensure the rights and protection of minorities and non-Tigrayan in the new country?
Yeah, I think that for that a lot of what should be focused in Tigray, right, is human rights. We are seeing what has happened to Tigray is what is the absence of human rights. And from here on out, Tigrayans should, and the whatever political systems will exist in Tigray, that should be the central focus, is what does it look like to promote democracy and human rights in this new country? And what does that mean? That also means ensuring protection for minorities that exist in Tigray, like the Kunama and Yoruba, who have been decimated by this genocide. What does it look like to actively protect them? But also for other ethnic groups that exist in Tigray, right? What does it look like to ensure that these people are safe? Because again, we are not here to promote hatred amongst other ethnicities or other minorities, because we understand, the Tigrayan people understand what has happened as a result of promoting hatred and ethnic discrimination, because we are experiencing that right now. And so in this new country, we should no longer accept this as being a norm. We should no longer accept that we have arbitrary hatred for certain groups. In this new Tigray, we should be able to accept those people who come, and we should be able to protect people as human beings. And what does that mean? That means censoring human rights. That means censoring equality for people. That means protecting those who are existing in this new nation.
And how do you plan to handle transitional justice for war crimes or human rights abuses from all sides?
Yeah, I think that this is a very, very, very important question. I think that this is like the first step for whatever a world that looks like after this genocide is, how do we address this? How do we have reparations for the people? Because I don't think that there can be any sort of healing until there is acknowledgement for the war crimes, and as well as reparations for the war crimes that have existed. Part of that will be having probably independent bodies, people who can investigate what has happened and determine that this is a genocide. We have already seen that independent bodies have called this a genocide. The Newsline Institute, I believe a year ago, designated this as genocide. The UN has already called part of some of these things ethnic cleansing, has called these things war crimes. And so we need to have independent bodies who have no stakes in this to determine that what crimes have been occurring, as well as to implement safeguards in order to ensure that there are reparations for the people of Tigray. And also this would require communication and conversation with the people of Tigray in order to heal, because that is going to be very, very important for any kind of future that exists in relationship with Ethiopia and Eritrea. How do we heal from what has happened here? How do we begin to build relationships that promote our own democracy and promote our own success while we are still in neighbors with Ethiopia and Eritrea?
Amazing. Accountability and feedback. How can the public hold the independence movement accountable during and after the transition?
I think that the fight for an independent Tigray is a people's movement, first and foremost. It has nothing to do with any politician, and it has nothing to do with any political group. This is a movement for the people and by the people. And as such, anybody who is trying to seek an independent Tigray should be held accountable to the people of Tigray. And they should be the ones who are engaging in these conversations. There should be full transparency and accountability for any decision-making that is occurring with regards to what a future for Tigray looks like. There should be active conversations with those people, the people who have suffered and who have given their lives in order to see fit an independent Tigray. I think that we here in the diaspora, what we can do is also hold the movement accountable, being able to put pressure on those figures who are in Tigray to be able to support the people, being able to provide any amount of support to the people of Tigray, because that should be what should be at the center of this movement is, how are we going to create an independent Tigray that is for the people and by the people? And how are we going to keep anybody and everyone accountable to that?
Great. Here comes our last question. But after this last question, you can go ahead and make a summary of what we've been talking. And also, if you have a message for the people of Tigray. So my last question here is, are there any red lines or compromises you are willing to accept in negotiations with the Ethiopian state?
I think that the lines for freedom should be determined by the people of Tigray and those who have sacrificed in Tigray to achieve independence. It is not for me or for anyone, especially in the diaspora, to determine what the red lines or compromises look like. To me, myself, my role as someone who loves my people is to support the resistance and to support the people and to ensure the rights of every Tigrayan. And what compromises or whatever has to be done to negotiate with the Ethiopian state, that is a question for the people of Tigray to decide, as those who have sacrificed everything for their people, in my opinion.
Very good. Thank you, Hiyab. I'm done with my questions. If you would like to comment or give a summary of what our today's episode, also if you have any message for the people of Tigray.
Yeah, I think that what has happened in this past 5 years has proven to us that the Tigrayan people can no longer exist in this Ethiopian state. We have seen that the Ethiopian government and Abiy Ahmed do not care about the people of Tigray. And what our job is here as those in the diaspora is, how can we support the people of Tigray, and how do we support a people's movement that resists the fascist governments that are existing? And what is central right now is figuring out, how do we end this genocide? How do we end the suffering that's going on? And how do we prevent the deaths of more people? And those should be the central questions that we are engaging in as we discuss things like, what does an independent Tigray look like? My message for the people of Tigray would be, I'm sorry. For 5 years, you have suffered under this genocide, and it is not okay that this has happened. It is not okay that 1 million people have been killed. And my message for the people of Tigray is that their strength is what gives us strength here. Their resistance is what allows us to continue to support them here. It is their country. They have sacrificed for their country. And what we should do, our duty, both those who are in Ethiopia, for those who are politicians in Tigray, for those who are here in the diaspora, our duty right now is to figure out, how do we end the suffering for the people of Tigray, and how can we support the people of Tigray as they fight for an independent Tigray, is what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Hiyab. Thank you for your presence today on Tigrai Press. And I hope to see you on the same or a different agenda interview. Yeah. And I wish you all the best. You're very bright and young and vibrant. You could help a lot. You can offer your help to the people of Tigray. And thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Yeah.
أيوة بري
أيوة